John Brown, praised lunatic or abolitionist hero. Brown killed 5 pro-slavery settlers at Potawatomi and freed 11 slaves.
John Brown and a handful of followers attacked the government arsenal where guns were stored at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in the hope of taking weapons and starting a slave revolt.
John Brown was then captured, tried, sentenced to death, and hung. I am quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. John Brown.
What is the truth about John Brown? The book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, surveyed 12 current U.S. history textbooks. Of these, 7 of 12 textbooks have a neutral opinion on John Brown.
The 7 textbooks don't imply that John Brown was crazy, but neither do they show him as a hero. Instead, they just state the facts. By staying neutral, these books are trying to be politically correct, but don't provide a full picture of who John Brown really was and what motivated him to sacrifice his life for his beliefs.
The other 5 textbooks do take a stand. They either paint him as a cold-blooded murderer or as an abolitionist martyr. Which was he?
Some of the remaining textbooks, as well as many history books, describes Brown as either crazy, a religious fanatic, or a psychotic killer. A book called American Pageant calls Brown narrowly ignorant and God's angry man.
Still, others suggest he was uneducated and that his motivation to help slaves is mysterious. In the 1840s, he somehow got interested in helping black slaves. Brown's killings at Potawatomi are similarly shown as pointless killings instead of acts in retaliation to attacks by the pro-slavery side of the battle for Kansas Territory. The portrayal of Brown has changed as public opinion about slavery and civil rights has changed. Author James Lowen points out the treatment of Brown, like the treatment of slavery and Reconstruction, has changed in American history textbooks. From 1890 to 1970, John Brown was insane. Before 1890, he was perfectly sane, and after 1970, he regained his sanity. When the period of Reconstruction ended and the Union troops left the South, the KKK and other racist forces came back to power. With their return, the truth about John Brown and his motivations vanished, and new reasons were for his actions. Again, author James Lowen points out, rather, we must recognize that the insanity in which historians have charged John Brown was never psychological. It was ideological. Brown's actions made no sense to textbook writers between 1890 and about 1970. To make no sense is to be crazy. I believe to have interfered as I have done, as I freely admitted I have done, on behalf of his despised poor. I did not wrong, but right. John Brown.
The truth about John Brown can be found by discovering what people who knew him thought of him during his life and at the time of his death. As stated earlier, some texts and history books show John Brown as dim-witted, an abolitionist by chance, and a religious fanatic. John Brown was actually well-educated, well-traveled in the U.S. and Europe, from a family with an abolitionist tradition, and a man who had thought deeply about his religious beliefs. I am quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. John Brown. John Brown believed that all peaceful means of ending slavery have been attempted and had failed. He knew that slavery was morally wrong and had decided that it was worth fighting and possibly dying for.
African Americans, abolitionists, and many of America's top intellectuals of the time looked up to him in life and mourned his death. In fact, Henry David Thoreau compared Brown to Christ by saying, "These men, in teaching us how to die, have at the same time taught us how to live." Emerson wrote that Brown's hanging would make the gallows as glorious as the cross, also comparing him to Jesus. John Brown's death took the United States one step closer to war. Victor Hugo of France wrote, "Hanging Brown will open the latent fissure that will finally split the Union asunder." I agree with modern historian David Reynolds' view of John Brown. Brown was not insane. Instead, he was a deeply religious, flawed, yet ultimately noble reformer who was willing to fight and die for his beliefs. He was a man who saw slavery itself as an unprovoked war of one race against another.
John Brown, fighting like the